you're not eating in a slow, relaxed state, you're not going to have optimal digestion, so you won't be able to unlock and utilize all those nutrients as efficiently.
Today, my guest is Kaitlin Borncamp. She's a former CPA turned Certified Nutritional Therapist and Health Alignment Specialist. She's helping executives and companies improve their daily energy, performance, mental health, and resiliency. She realized that professionals fall into the trap of trading their health for wealth, and she felt called to support their teammates and clients in a different way. Her company, Feel Great with Kate, uses her unique combination of corporate and nutrition expertise to help leaders unlock sustainable energy, mental clarity, and motivation. And you're going to love what she has to say today. Let's check it out. Great day, everyone. I'm Mike Pawlawski, former world champion quarterback, serial entrepreneur, and award-winning TV producer and host. I've lived a life dedicated to mastery through performance and mindset integration. Each week, I'll bring you the insights, strategies, and stories from some of the world's top performers to help you unlock your greatness. Whether you're an athlete aiming for the top or an executive driving your team to victory, this is where you learn how to train your greatness to become an everyday great. Now let's get after it. Well, joining me now is one of my favorite people that I've met in the last year, and it is Kaitlin Borncamp. She is a health alignment expert, and we've been talking about nutrition and health and mindset and everything else. And so I don't want to break it all down for you. I want Kaitlin to break it down for you. Kaitlin, fantastic to have you on the show. Nutrition, so important, and mindsets about it, so important for people these days, and there's so much misinformation out there.
Oh, completely. Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. I'm excited to talk about it here today because I think it's an underutilized tool that we all have in our tool belts, and in my opinion, it's completely misaligned in terms of how we live our life today. So yeah, first and foremost, I want to share by saying, I never planned to be a health alignment expert, and part of my journey was, I was comfortable in my corporate career, like I think many of us are out there. And going through my, consulting profession and in public accounting, and then, along the way, I realized how important and how much of an impact nutrition had, not only on how I looked, that's what I cared about at the time, but also on how I feel and perform on a daily basis.
Yeah, without a doubt. And so I love the fact you come from that corporate background, right? You come from, for people that don't know you, you come from a background as a CPA, right? So you were somebody who was analytical, data-driven, working hard in the moment. And I know this because my wife is a CPA, and so I know what CPAs tend to be like, but they take things apart. They get to the brass tacks of everything. They find all the detail. Tell me about your background. What really drove you to get into this? Why this field for you now?
Yeah, no, I love that. So what drove me to get into it was, like I said, I was at a point in my career where I was wanting to perform better in the gym. So I had found CrossFit as well as just in my high demand job as a CPA at the time. I was in busy season and I was experiencing a lot of brain fog and low energy. So I was experimenting with some different, quote unquote diets at the time. And what I had found was the Whole30. So that's, a diet that you do where you cut out a lot of stuff for 30 days and you basically just very, very clean, increase protein, a bunch of nutrients. You cut out alcohol, namely, you cut out caffeine and things like that. So it was very profound. I had felt so much better in a short amount of time. By week 3, I was feeling amazing. And I was astonished by how much just that food had an impact on how I looked and felt. I'd also lost around 10 inches around my body, but I was the same weight. So that's inflammation. So that was another huge learning point for me, is how other elements of nutrition actually play out, not just in how you look again, but how you feel and kind of on a daily basis. And so from there, I was very interested. I was intrigued. And I don't think I would have had that same interest had I not had that experience myself, because it's one thing to talk about, but when you truly feel it, then you understand a little bit. So I got really interested in it. I started researching it, listening to a bunch of podcasts, reading books. Then the next thing happened where I, understood that doctors today are not educated whatsoever in nutrition. Most doctors today, I think, get one course or less. And even, I was listening to something last week on a webinar and doctors were admitting that it's just not talked about, it's overlooked. So that really kind of rocked my understanding right at the time, again, being comfortable in my way of my career and my life and thinking we have a very good healthcare system in this country. And that really broke that wide open for me to say that actually reframing it to be what it is that we actually have a really good sick care system today, which is fine. We need that. However, one of my lessons that I've learned as a consultant is that we always have to manage expectations, because when you have misaligned expectations, that's when people get upset and that's what causes pain. And I think that it's complete misalignment of expectations that we call our healthcare system a healthcare system, when in reality, it's more of a sick care system. So from there, I really understood that we have to take personal responsibility for our health. There are a lot of elements that what we eat and consume on a daily basis, both in food and other elements of our life, really have a greater impact than we've previously given it credit to. So that's what I'm really passionate about, is helping, professionals, high achievers, busy professionals, leaders, executives align their life so that they can have the best performance and achieve their goals.
Well, there's a lot in there, and we'll get to all of it, but I love that fact, and it takes so much for people when you have that experience for themselves. As an athlete, nutrition was such a huge part of what we did, and I come from an Italian household with a German mother, and so food was a love language in my family growing up. They would food at every meal, and if they loved you, they would feed you, and my mother would feed me until I couldn't eat anymore. Luckily, I had a metabolism because I was an athlete that was super high at the time, but they were stuffing everything into me. When I got to college, I had to completely rethink the way I thought about food. And I know a huge piece of what you do with people is that reframing in terms of the way people think about diet. Talk to me, how are you talking to people about diet, and how should people be thinking about it?
Yeah, first and foremost, we approach it from a place of appreciating what our body does and needs, because there's an element of understanding, right? We don't need to know everything in detail. That's what very smart scientists and doctors are for. But really what we need to do is appreciate how our brain functions. How does how muscles work, right? How can we perform in the gym and at work and do all those things? So understanding at a base level how our body functions is without a doubt important. So I go over that with clients in some of the key areas. To expand on nutrition, digestion is a huge area. Blood sugar is another big one that parlays into weight management that most people are interested in and cutting weight. So you need to understand your hormones and your blood sugar balance. And what I mean by that is that part of it is I had a trainer along the way back when I was in CrossFit, and I had a really keen idea on what I wanted to look like, right? And some of the goals that I had within the gym. So he gave me, the quote unquote perfect macro plan and just told me to eat and just gave me, it's kind of funny looking back now because he gave me a spreadsheet, which was all about compliance, right? With personal trainers, it's all about compliance. And you're just like, just eat exactly what I tell you, as if the human isn't a human and doesn't have a brain and, a heart and need to think about
That's all. Just eat this. This is it. You have to stick in this box 100%.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, what are we, a robot? So that was a red flag looking back. But what I learned from that, right, is that he was giving me these great macronutrients that my body needed from what he viewed as from a professional trainer's standpoint. And then he later told me in our coaching together, at the time I was working this really busy job, stressful job. And he's like, Kaitlin, you can never hit your goals if you're this stressed. And he just left it at that. He never told me why or explained how the metabolic processes work. And I just passed it over. I was like, what are you talking about? Screw you. Like, I can do everything, right? I can have it all. I'm used to doing and just working harder because that's my personality, which is a lot of us in public accounting and consulting, overachievers and perfectionism. We just are used to working harder and going after it. And what does that also sound like? High degrees of stress, which inhibits digestion. So what I learned from that is that we need to slow our body down, especially at mealtime. And even if you eat the quote unquote perfect, air quotes here, right? Perfect diet or even meal, if you're not eating in a slow, distressed state, relaxed state, you're not going to have optimal digestion. So you won't be able to unlock and utilize all those nutrients as efficiently.
Yeah. And I mean, such a huge piece of it. Digestion's so huge. You and I have talked about this off camera, but, this last year and a half now, I got into a diet where I had a lot more fermented foods and added some live culture into my diets and improved my digestion. I can't tell you how much of a difference it made in terms of my health. Digesting properly, having the right, gut flora, all that stuff. Huge for me in terms of the way I improved my weight, the way I felt, my inflammation, like all of those things. What are you suggesting to people at home? What are you suggesting to your clients about the way they're digesting and how they handle it?
Yeah, without a doubt, I would say sit down while we're eating. So if I think about digestion, I always think about it at the point of entry, right? Like while we're eating. So my mind, like you mentioned, as CPAs, we always go down to the reductionist, right? What is the end result or the base level? What's important to really have proper nutrition? So when we think about digesting, you need to be sitting down. You need to be chewing your food, because what's that allowing is all of those good enzymes and things start to be excreted in your mouth and in your digestive tract before you even eat your food. It actually starts when you look at your food and smell your food. So there is something to be said about taking a moment in our busy life to prepare a meal. That's oftentimes one of the biggest, roadblocks I hear from busy professionals, right, is I don't even block off lunch. So that's what we talk about is some of these, the habits and unblocking yourself to even make the time to eat lunch. And I want to say too that it comes back to you in rewards, right? So oftentimes this is how our brains work is why would I take 30 minutes out of my day to eat when I could just eat during a meeting off camera or something, right? Because it's extra time, but I'm not being productive. So we associate digestion and eating our food as unproductive. And I want to reframe that for people and say that it's actually one of the most productive times of your day. And let me prove it to you, right? So we all know the stat that came out a couple years ago where it said for every time you're distracted, you have to refocus and it takes about 7 minutes to regain focus, right? Well, what's more distracting than your body telling you that you're hungry? That's literally what our body is designed for, is to give us these hunger cues. So you're going to be listening to that. You're going to be distracted. So I was talking to one, professional, and I broke it down for her to say, hey, if you spend 30 minutes blocking off time for lunch, that's going to save you from snacking throughout the afternoon and save you many hours later in the day from being distracted just from being hungry alone.
Yeah, for sure. What a difference that makes, too. And I know a big piece of the digestion is actually preparing the food, too. You talked about preparing the diet, right? Your body gets ready to digest as you're preparing food, right? So that preparation, that being there, being present for that meal, being there in all, that's a big help as well, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. And something around that too, though, is there is the other end of the spectrum, right? So call myself out here. I'm from Boulder, Colorado, right? Which is known to be crunchy. So I'm not on the end of the spectrum where you don't need to, have everything homegrown. And while that's wonderful. And if you love gardening, more power to you. But I just want to normalize it for people that we don't have to take it to the extreme of taking hours to slow cook each meal. It doesn't need to be that. I'm just suggesting 5 to 10 extra minutes to prepare your food. Sit down for your meal for 10 minutes and take time to actually chew your food and consume it. So it can still be done within a reasonable time of about 30 to 45 minutes per day during lunch specifically. And it has just profound impacts on not only, like I said, your hunger cues later in the day to save you and be more effective, but also in your ability to actually absorb and digest those nutrients. Because I'm all about efficiency, right? That's what made me good at my corporate job and in consulting and performance improvement is how can we be the most efficient possible? And so when it comes back to efficient nutrition, again, we need to stop framing nutrition as just calories in or calories out. It's so much more than that. And our body is brilliant and it does the work for us. It does all of it without us knowing it or even understanding it, but we have to set it up for success, right? So I always tell my clients, you ask what we kind of work through is I give them just enough information to understand some of these metabolic processes so that they can have some appreciation and awareness because you really can't support it as well if you're unaware. Right. And our busy modern society is such that we're just go, go, go all the time. We're just constantly distracted. Right. We could have a whole episode on just the amount of overstimulation that we all have and things that are vying for our attention. Right. And so we have to come back to the fact that we live in our body. We literally live in our body all day, every day. So what's more efficient than supporting our home and what supports our brain health, our ability to focus, our ability to think and everything else, live long life. Right. All that good stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. You get to a great point there in the fact that like our society is overstimulated, but we're also being told through all that stimulation that we could have everything that we want, that we can eat crap and still be slim, that we can have sugars and not gain weight, that our health is going to be okay or it's going to be great in spite of the fact that we're eating hyper-processed foods and like you said, we're not sitting down to have lunch or we're not taking the time to digest our food. That's a huge piece of the problem with diet in this country, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. I agree. Yeah, we want our cake and eat it too, right? We want to have all the things and then still have, a good looking body and feel good and not wake up with aches and pains and still be happy all the time. And like you called out earlier, there's a reason why you felt so much better when you were eating fermented food. We're now starting to understand just how important the gut microbiome is. That was something along the way that I learned that no doctor, right? I was on antidepressants at one point. So overcoming depression and experiencing depression is something that's part of my journey. And I never once had a doctor I was going to therapy for or a psychiatrist prescribing me medications explain that, the gut brain axis and how our gut health actually significantly impacts our brain health, right? And so wanting to eat all the things in the food industry is having a negative impact on our health. And I think, again, it goes back to misaligned expectations. Can we eat those things? Sure. But should you expect optimal health and happiness and longevity with it? No. That's misaligned expectation. And the other part of it too is coming from the corporate background in the industry of public accounting, working with finances and numbers and seeing how financial systems flow together and making business decisions off of that, right? Just to remind everybody, I think that we forget that food companies are in business. So we hold them to somehow like a double standard as if they're not in business for profit. And that's a whole other conversation because we almost equate, because food is like health, we subconsciously know that food is correlated to health. And because we hold doctors on this pedestal to have our best interests in mind, which I don't necessarily think they do, but right, we think that they do. So then we assimilate the food industry and food that we eat thinking, oh, how bad can the food be because it's sold on the shelves that I can buy and feed my family or myself. And we have to watch out for ourselves. We have to have some due diligence, some discernment to really understand that those companies are spending a lot of money on marketing and they know exactly what tastes delicious for our taste buds. They're taking advantage of our, eyesight when we're buying foods, and they say all the right words, right? I mean, the word healthy isn't even regulated or natural. Like those are two things that you see. It's just like greenwashing, a couple of years ago, and it started with all the environmental sustainability stuff, right? There's certain things that are regulated and there's certain things that aren't. And marketers of food companies know exactly how to kind of get us to buy what tastes good. So to your point, we want all the good stuff and we want to feel good. And unfortunately, we're just coming to a point where it's can't happen. It's not available to us.
Yeah, and when you have engineers literally engineering foods to hit all of your senses, right? It gives you the crunchy, it gives you the salty, it gives you the sweet. It hits all of those taste buds that your cravings are calling for at the times that you're hungry. They are literally engineering this stuff to do that for you. They're creating an addiction through your dopamine. It's insane that the foods that we have out there, but they're so not good for you. You talked about your journey with depression, with the antidepressants. When you are constantly in a state of inflammation, that affects mood, right? When your gut is not right, that affects mood. A huge piece of anxiety, depression is our feeling like we can control and get out of anything, that we have some control over it. When our body is constantly inflamed, we start to feel like it's out of control, whether we know it or not. And that sits there and it just resonates with your body and you feel like crap all the time. And even if you don't know why, I have it with breathing because I had cystic fibrosis growing up, right? I had stomach issues from anti-inflammatories from playing for so long, and it led to massive cases of anxiety for me because the health issues I couldn't control. And when we're constantly putting refined sugars and refined wheats, which feels like sugar to our body, into our bodies, it's causing all kinds of serious problems. And part of this engineering and part of all this messaging, I love the fact your messaging is exactly right. They have marketers delivering messages on how to sell us on this food that is engineered to get us addicted. So, and we have this diet culture now built around it as well. Talk about what the diet culture is doing to people at home in terms of their thinking.
Oh, yeah. It's 100% focusing on calories, right? As if that's the only answer that we need to think about in terms of nutrition. And then what it did the last, 20 years is avoiding fat. So we now want to be, claiming that people should be low fat, which is absolutely not the case. So there's a few key things that have happened in the industry in the last 40 or 50 years that has led people to believe that all they have to do is focus on calories. And I'll tell you what, I was there. I was doing that 10 years ago when I, previously had experienced an eating disorder. And then I went quickly into disordered eating. And I thought I was eating healthy. I was tracking all my calories that I was eating. I was tracking everything that I was burning and trying to be as healthy as possible. And what it does is it creates a very unhealthy, physically unhealthy, right? Because the food that you're eating actually isn't that nutrition. But then second, what it does, it creates a very unhealthy mindset around food. Because then what I was doing, I learned, Mike, is what it came down to is I was weighing myself every day. And it took me years to realize this. But basically, my mood was dependent on the scale that day. And I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with this. And I learned, hey, if the scale was, down a little bit and I was feeling good about myself, it actually came back to bite me a little bit because then I was in a happy mood. So I let myself eat a little bit, sweets or chocolate or whatever the thing was that was in front of me that day. And then if the scale was up, I would feel bad about myself and then I'd want to go work out more. But understanding that weight specifically isn't just impacted by calories in exercise. It's also impacted by hormones and many other metabolic processes that are ongoing in your body at one time. So this is, more modern science. I think that's still catching up. And when you asked, hey, what do people think about when you think of, calories and things today or nutrition today, it's definitely calories. We're stuck 20, 30 years ago in that mindset, and we need to break out of it. We need to think more holistically. We need to appreciate the body for everything that it does and recognize that it's nutrition is more complex than what can be put on a food label. So then you get into, well, how can you measure nutrition? And so what I look at with clients is using a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. That really helps a few key areas in managing their blood sugar, and also understanding regular blood work and some different functional tests that can help give you a deeper insight into your own body's health.
You froze up there for a second. Sorry about that. You good? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. And and the beauty of this thing is it will. So we'll cut this part out, but it actually keeps it all clean for us. And so I will actually get what you finished because it's recording to your computer and then uploading. So that's why I use this system now. I had a great Zoom one, and it blew up in the middle of it, and I lost a big chunk of one of my former teammates. I'm like, oh, that was gold too. All right, perfect. So I'll get back into it here. 3, 2, 1. So that's great. What you're talking about is now having measurables, right? As an athlete, we always had things that you had to measure going along to see where your progress was. I love the fact that you are talking about doing that with people, because how do you know where you are if not just the scale, which has been our, that was our holy grail forever. It was our weight. But how do you know if you don't measure these things? What kind of things, like what kind of suggestions, what kind of practices are you implementing with your clients in that regard?
Yeah. So what we work on is the CGM, the continuous glucose monitor. And the reason why we do that with most clients is because it helps a few key areas. It helps check the box to understand, are we eating a balanced diet in terms of macronutrients? And then secondly, it helps understand how are our hormones being balanced. Blood sugar is one of the key areas with the relationship with insulin and a few other hormones that's very easy to get out of balance today for many of the reasons we've talked about with all the food, right? And it just...
Well, easy sugars, right? So
easy
we never had access to easy sugars like this. It was always combined with a fiber of some kind. So if you wanted that sugar, you had to go get it out of the fiber, in which case you couldn't get it as much as you can now. Now you can just literally mainline sugar.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And it comes at an expense, right? Because those carbohydrates and calories are coming with very low amount of nutrient value. So your body is having to do all this work to process similar amount of calories, but isn't getting the reward of the nutrients that, say, a whole food or well-balanced meal would have. So the glucose monitor is very helpful. And then the third key area that it really helps us understand is stress and the impact of stress on our body, right? So this is something that's really unknown. Stress is very elusive, right? I went through many great corporate trainings, but ultimately was somewhat disappointed with some of the end result, because they would say, hey, just manage your stress and here's a few tools how to do that. But for me, I needed to know the how. How is that impacting me, right? It goes back to that trainer I had all those years ago who said I couldn't accomplish my goals because I was too stressed. He didn't explain why. And so one of the areas that stress impacts our body is raising our glucose levels. So if we have a diet that is constantly raising our glucose levels because of all the excess carbohydrates and refined sugars, and we have a lifestyle where we have high stress loads, right, then that's where we have such a propensity and increase of type 2 diabetes, largely being known now as type 3, or Alzheimer's is becoming known as type 3 diabetes because of the impact on our brain long term. And so these are things, again, going back to managing expectations is why I'm so passionate about what I do, because I want to empower people that we have the tools and things available to us to take responsibility for our health and have a real impact on your health, how you feel, how you look, how you perform today, as well as your long-term health.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And kind of the mechanics of the whole stress and glucose and the whole 9 yards, people don't think about it. And this, now we're getting into what I do with a performance mindset, for people, for athletes, for high achievers, is that your body's meant to be in the stress response in a very short-term way. You are meant to be in stress response. I see a predator. Ooh, I react. I want to get away. You have the stress response. Your body elevates your cortisol. Your cortisol elevates your glucose levels to give you energy to run, to fight, to do whatever you need to do in that moment. And it also increases your blood pressure, makes you better at breathing. Like, it gives you all these things that are meant to fight or to run. Well, that's great short term, so that you can handle that in a very short term basis. But when we do this constant stress of day to day, and as you were talking about, all of the hyper inputs that we get from all across the universe of the interwebs and everything else, our body is constantly stressed, and we're stressed at work, and we have 24-hour-a-day emails coming from work and from bosses, and we have expectations on us all the time. And that stress is constantly just poking our stress response, right? Our vagus nerve is activating, and we're starting to kick up that stress response, which then kicks in the cortisol, which then adds glucose. And so it gets all that back into our bloodstream, and it keeps us with high blood sugars. Well, high blood sugars kill nerves, and they create inflammation. That's what happens. And inflammation is the culprit for most human illness these days. No matter what it is, it's inflammation that causes the problem. And so putting yourself in that stress response, and then the way we eat actually creates stress response because we feel like crap. And so it's this whole self-sustaining feedback loop, which is why I love what you're doing with people. I love how you are approaching people, and how you are dealing with people at a root cause in terms of nutrition and getting us back to the basics. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert here, but this is getting back to the way that we used to eat, helping us get back into the blood sugar levels that we used to be at when the way our body's designed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And when you understand some of these metabolic processes just at a base level, you start to have that appreciation for all that our body does. And if we just tweak what we do in our modern lifestyle today, just a little bit, right? Again, we don't have to go back to preparing our food for 3 hours a day by any means. There's a lot of easy things that we can do and help support our body's optimal health. And that's there again, right? Another answer I would have to your previous question on measuring things is the blood work piece is so helpful because you're measuring it from a functional blood work perspective, functional range, which is a much tighter range of blood work markers, as opposed to what a lot of people don't realize is that even the blood work that our doctors or primary care physicians run today is around 15 markers, and they're being assessed from the conventional range. The conventional range is the previous 5-year average of the population. So it's a moving target. And I don't know about you, right? But you're smiling because, you see these rates in rising disease, of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, a lot of other largely preventable lifestyle diseases. And I don't want my ranges to be measured against the average of today, right? I want health to be normal again. And I want to be measured against using functional and what my body really needs.
Yeah. Can I go back to the 20s, please? So they had, I remember this because years ago, I was going through fertility stuff for our family, trying to have a baby, and they were taking testosterone measures. And the testosterone measures back then, like the average was somewhere from like 300 to 1100. Well, now I just saw something the other day. It's like 200 to 800 or 200 to 900. I'm like, that's kind of a big difference in terms of where it's gone. But if you're using the rolling average, you're teaching me stuff here. I didn't even know it was like the rolling average of the last 5 years or whatever, because I thought this is just where it should be. This is human existence, but medicine is constantly evolving too, I guess.
It's behind. Yeah, it's behind. It is evolving. There's a lot of good work going on there. But yes, we need to be aware of, again, it goes back to managing expectations. You need to just be aware of how doctors are looking at certain ranges, or how a functional practitioner like myself is looking at ranges. And you choose as the end consumer. You choose when is that information helpful and when is other information helpful. But again, we just need to have the upfront awareness of what it is. And so, yeah, I would say, testosterone is an interesting topic, Mike, and I'm sure is really relevant for a lot of your listeners in the sense that testosterone rates are dropping significantly, and it's actually becoming a really big problem. And so to relate it back to things that matter, it's interesting that eating proper nutrition has an impact on your testosterone levels as a male and a female.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that's really interesting to me is that I look at, especially as a female, I was on birth control for 15 years. And this is something that I didn't really want. I ignored because I was busy in my corporate career, right? Obviously, right? So I didn't want to have a family at that time. And it wasn't until I really got serious about learning about impacts of my gut microbiome, like I mentioned, and things on that front with hormones, that I finally looked into how impactful the birth control pill is on our body. And what I found is that the birth control pill obviously provides synthetic hormones, and those go back into our environment. And now we're being found out that men and women have inflated rates, not rates, but ranges of estrogen in their body from our drinking water, right? From all the hormones that we put in there, but also from other things as well, from xenoestrogens, which are things that mimic estrogens in our food. So when we talk about eating a whole food diet, it's not just about what we're eating, it's also about what we're not eating. And so eating something like a diet high in soy, especially inorganic soy or conventional soy, soy acts as a phytoestrogen or xenoestrogen, and so that's mimicking.
I run from
estrogen
soy,
in our
by
body.
the way. I run from soy. I read this study a long time ago. I'm like, soy, leave me alone, right?
But it's things that we don't think about, right? Again, going back to there's so much information out there in today's world, especially just on the topic of health, right? One thing that I'm really passionate about is talking about how important and how helpful eating whole meat is, right? Steak and chicken and fish and all those whole food sources of
Now you're
protein.
speaking my language right there.
Oh, yeah, right. And even going so far as the organ meats. Because, it's one of those things where it's like in today's world, you can look at one, article or post on social media or whatnot and think, wow, they must be really healthy because they're proclaiming, veganism and plant-based foods, which are made from soy. And then, it's just confusing. We have a lot of the same topics being talked about, but are very different impacts on our body metabolically.
And that if anything, people at home should take away from, like, there's so many different messages out there around diet right now, around how we should construct our diet. Oh, it needs to be all vegan. Oh, it needs to be all like carnivore. Oh, it needs to be paleo. Like, holy smokes, our bodies evolved and adapted as omnivores. You can argue that we eat almost anything. But for me, my thought process, and tell me where I'm wrong here or if I'm wrong here, is around what did I have access to, for years in terms of my body functioning best? Because that's what it's used to. Now, we have a lot more efficiencies, which can help us be even better. We can extract vitamins and micronutrients and everything else that we can use to help ourselves as well now that we couldn't do in the past. But in terms of like macro foods, macro meals, I think what could, the people before the agrarian revolution, what could they get to? And I don't want to go paleo on people. I'm not going to pick a side here because everybody's got a side and they're fighting for it. But like, what could I get to if I was around before technology?
Yeah, I think of it similarly, and I think you're spot on in the sense of what you're getting at is what will be the most efficient for your body to use from a food perspective and nutrition perspective. And the answer is largely the same answer as what you're getting to, which is foods that are unprocessed, that our body can break down, because that's how we evolved. That's how our bodies evolved to digest the food and use the food. And so it comes down to, again, efficient nutrition. Yes, are there things that I capitalize on today that I didn't, we wouldn't have had access to 100 or 200 years ago? Absolutely. I now prefer to take my organ meats in capsules because I've tried to take it the other way, where you eat raw organ meats or you cook it with food, and it's it's a little bit gamey. So
it can be a little rough. Yeah, it can be a little rough for sure.
Exactly, right. And I don't always have time to make all of my own bone broth, right? So there are some modern conveniences that we can take advantage of, but we can use them to our advantage. It doesn't have to be the modern conveniences of the highly processed refined sugars that are what's available, because what I work on with people is setting us up for success. Understanding, like I said earlier, at a base level, what does our bodies need? And then going through the foundational pillars of health to really set you up for success in your life. And because you get to a good question here, and this is the question of priorities, Mike, because you get to the question of, okay, well then, am I better off, right? I get this question, am I better off taking this supplement or should I take a powdered greens? And so you get to these trade-offs because we can't do all things all the time. And what's good for me isn't necessarily what you need, right? So we're also unique in that sense. So there's not one right answer for each person. And so the question really comes down to is, well, what's right for me right now? And so that's where I get into, let's understand what are your current habits, what can be easily optimized, because there is a foundational level of health. We know this. All science points to it, right? If you read any book on health, they're pretty much saying the same thing at a base level, which is the commonalities are eating a whole food, unprocessed diet is efficient for your body to digest, which will cause the least amount of inflammation, the most amount of nutrition and utilization, right? So those are the basics. But then we get beyond that is how do we fit things into our life to make them more efficient? And I think that that's where, in large part, it is helpful to have a coach and to help somebody understand what's more important for you, what will have the most impact for you, because it's not always helpful to talk about everything that you can do, because you won't get the same rewards that maybe somebody else would out of that. So we do want to be strategic in the sense of how do we approach our habits and our changes from a health perspective, because ultimately we have a limited amount of time and energy.
Well, and you kind of hit both those things perfectly. Having that coach, we are such specialists in today's day and age. So back in, the olden days, you would have to farm and raise kids and cook and build houses and shoe horses. Like, you had to have a whole breadth of things that you can do. But now we are specialists, right? You were a CPA. I was an athlete. Like, I know my field. I know what I'm doing. But we have specialized so much, and diet and nutrition, what you are doing is pretty specialized. Like, there's a lot of knowledge about it. How important is it for somebody to have a coach to help them through that?
Oh, I think it's so important, because otherwise what happens is that you waste time, money, energy, and get frustrated in the sense of I've done this before, right? Before I got certified, before I worked with my own coaches, you spend thousands of dollars on supplements. You don't see the results that you want. You wonder if anything's working. So you need to have that strategic approach, and have somebody guiding you through it to be the most effective with your time, right? And I always tell clients, you can do some of these things on your own. And for some people, all you do need is to read a book or to listen to a podcast, and you're off and the horse is running. Not everybody would benefit from working with a coach, but 99% of people would, right? Because you're going to be able to do it. You're going to be able to do it faster, more efficient, and most importantly, it's going to be more enjoyable. Because one of the biggest downfalls or sort of pitfalls that I see people get into is that, again, there's so much information out there and it's so focused on calories, like I was saying earlier, is that they then think that they're doing all these things that are healthy, and they're using a lot of good habits, and they're trying really hard, but then it comes back to them and they feel frustrated, they feel limited, they feel restricted. So then it quickly turns nutrition from what should be a place of empowerment to help fuel your body and brain to a place of shame. And I think a lot of people are caught there and they don't always recognize it. And I want to just enlighten people that it doesn't have to be like that. You can actually look to fuel your body and feel good about it. You can feel great about your choices, knowing the trade-offs that you're making and feeling really confident and empowered in those choices.
Yeah, such an important point. There's like a couple of things that you hit on there. I'm trying to take notes furiously because you're saying so many great things here as we're talking. But one is, earlier we talked about the marketing messages around food, right? So even if you are reading and you're going, online, or you're reading books, there's going to be competing books. There's going to be competing voices talking about what you should do because they're trying to sell an angle. They're trying to sell a product. They have a business that they are trying to monetize, right? And so they have a message for you. And it may work for some people. That method may work for some people. It may not work for others. We all have, you said this earlier, we all have different body types. So having a coach who understands it like you, who can kind of walk you through that and find out and figure out what it is that your body specifically likes, is a huge deal.
Oh, 100%. And another thing I would mention too on that note is that somebody like me is trained to help you identify and understand what your body is telling you. So when we talk about data, right, we talked about CGM and blood work, but another huge underutilized element of data is the symptoms that your body is showing you.
See,
right?
You're going right where I was going to go next. I love it.
Yeah, because it's one thing, I learned this, right? And we live with symptoms. We live with symptoms and we think they're normal. So the value that a coach like myself can provide is giving you that sort of sounding board to pressure test and say, hey, I've lived with this and this thing happened at this time. And, now I have a headache once every other, week, and it's a migraine, and, oh, that's just normal. That's just how I am. Or, I had this thing and now my, allergies are always terrible. Just all these things that people think are normal. We normalize them, and it's not anybody's fault. It's actually what it means is that it's so common. You are not alone with these symptoms. These symptoms have become normalized. And just because it's common does not mean it's normal. Or said a different way, optimal health is actually becoming uncommon today, which is something I'm really passionate about changing. I want health to be common again. I want health to be normal again.
Wouldn't that be fantastic? Yeah, we're literally getting used to, I just got to deal with it. That's one of those things, I just got to put up with it. You don't have to put up with it, not if you're doing things properly. The other point that I wanted to get to that you were talking about, Anders Ericsson, who's the psychologist, he's literally the world's expert on experts, right? He did all those studies. Malcolm Gladwell kind of wrongly quoted him later saying 10,000 reps to get to great. He said, with a great coach, you can actually get there a lot faster. If you are doing functional reps, doing things right, if you have the training and if you have the information, you can get to mastery a lot faster. Well, we all want to be a master of our diet, of our nutrition, of our health. That's one thing we should always try to master in. And having a coach, now that we're so specialized, having somebody that knows what they're doing like you would make a huge difference for somebody. So that's my point on that front. The other thing I love is talking about listening to your body. As an athlete, I got into this earlier. I was taught when I was young, after coming from my family where, food was a love language, to Cal, he said one quote to me which stuck with me forever. Food is fuel. You can't think of food as love or comfort or any of those things. You have to think of it as fuel, and what kind of fuel do you want to put in your body to get where you want to go? And so what you want to do does it have a huge part of what you're trying to put into your body?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. I definitely agree that food is fuel. I would take it one step further and add that food is information, and that it's creating an environment for how your body and specifically how your cells are responding. And so it's another one of these levers that we have so much more autonomy and control over in our daily life. And we should give it the appreciation that it deserves because we eat every single day. And it's one of these areas, right? I love food. I know it's like my friend's joke. I eat a lot, even though I don't look like it, because I love it. And I get to, I've now figured out what works for me. But it's one of these things. That's the
beauty too, though. I'm going to cut you off real. That's the beauty, though. When you're eating right, you can eat a lot.
Right. And it looks like a lot, right? Because you're eating whole foods such as vegetables and, some berries, nuts, and seeds and meat. And it looks like a lot of food because it is, as opposed to these calorie-dense refined packaged foods that really don't have any nutrients in them. So, yeah. But to go back to food as fuel, it 100% is. It's more than that. It's really so much that our bodies need to function properly, to think critically. And I want to go back to kind of the transformation that I provide clients in the sense of, I work with teams in the corporate setting. So I do some sessions with them and it's very impactful. And a lot of the magic happens with some of the one-on-one clients that I work with, because it's one thing to say these things out loud and just talk about it as ideas, but the real kicker is the results, the tangible things that people get to walk away with experiencing. And what I love is exceeding expectations, right? As consultants, we always love exceeding expectations. And I always love when clients work with me for about the 5 or 6 week mark, and they have so much increased energy. They're not counting calories. They're just understanding the flow of how the food is fuel, right? And they're understanding what works for them. A few key changes compound over time, and they feel so much better. They have less brain fog. They're able to wake up better in the morning, right? I had one client who told me he was waking up, he was drowsy in the morning. It prevented him from really being on his A game with his team. So that led him to kind of have to play catch up after day's end. And so he was working, until 7 or 8, just doing his own work, right? So it doesn't just change how you feel on one day or, 1 minute basis. It changes your whole week, right? You get more time back with your family. So this has a trickle down effect. So again, going back to the base of what matters the most, when you support your nutrition as food as fuel, you're giving your body everything it needs to perform optimally, and that carries over into other areas of your life, which is really cool.
Absolutely. And it comes to one of the things that I love talking about. I'm actually writing my chapter for Everyday Great right now. By the way, anybody at home, if you want, I have that mental toughness checklist that you can check in with me. Text 55444. You can pick that up. We'll talk to you about how to get a hold of Kaitlin after this, because I know you're going to want to after this. Get yourself right. But habits, right? Developing habits around food, developing habits around nutrition. What should people at home be doing in terms of their habits?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, sit down when you eat food. Like we talked about, that's an easy one to increase your digestion of every meal that you are eating. Then when we break it down into what should we be eating and eating more whole foods, increase your protein, without a doubt. So one recommendation that I give as a principle, not necessarily a strict guideline, but about 0.8 of your body weight in grams of protein per day is a good goal of protein to consume. So if you weigh 200 pounds, eating about 160 grams of protein is a good guideline. Again, this is not perfect for everyone. If you're somebody like an athlete, you likely want to increase that because you have higher metabolic need and you want to gain more muscle. So if you're somebody who's performance-based and looking to optimize performance, increase that for sure. But that's a good baseline for most people listening. And then I would say also, optimizing sleep. Always getting 8 hours of sleep is very helpful because that's what our body is doing. It's repairing itself. Our brain is restoring itself at night.
Yeah, so, all fantastic advice. When I started doing all those things, is when I started feeling better. I had the injuries. I've had 29 surgeries or procedures. There's a ton of inflammation in my body from football. It's a tough sport. And so, but eating right, getting my sleep, macro, micronutrients, getting all of that stuff right is what got my body right. I dropped 45 pounds, as a result. I had my neck done, but I was able to work out again. But I dropped 45 pounds just by eating right. And I literally stuffed myself at meals. And I know that sounds like it's an awful thing. And so I would be frowned upon in the diet culture, but I'm not on a diet. I am eating healthy, which I think is what you get to with your clients, right?
100%. Yeah, we are not on a diet. We are not on a diet. We're learning how to fuel and properly nourish our body through food and other elements.
I love that. Where can people get a hold of you? Where do you want to send them so that they can contact you, can work with you, or things that they need to know?
Yes, follow me on LinkedIn. So connect with me on LinkedIn at Kaitlin Borncamp, CPA, and go there and sign up for my upcoming masterclasses. That's where you will get the most value. I do a free masterclass about once a month. It's always a really good time. And if you have any questions or topics that you want to see covered, feel free to send me a DM.
I love that. And I can always, I have the backstage pass, so I can get a hold of Kaitlin. But if you can get on her masterclass, if you can get her on LinkedIn, she gives you information out there on an almost daily basis in terms of what she's doing. It's great stuff. It's all great stuff. And you can learn, you can improve your health. And there's nothing like health. You can get a better job, right? You can develop new friends, but nothing is going to change your life like being healthy.
I completely agree. Health is wealth.
Health is wealth. And on that, so glad that you came here today. A bunch of people at home got better based on this conversation. Kaitlin is an expert. Make sure you reach out to her, contact her. I appreciate you coming on here today. Always awesome to talk to you, friend. Always great to have you on. I appreciate you so much.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, and everybody at home, I hope that helped you out. I know it helped you out because it was a masterclass here today on how you should frame your thinking around health. I appreciate you guys listening. Remember, I am here to help you guys out. Don't forget, text GREAT to 55444. I want to help you figure out how you can live every day great and have the life of your dreams. So appreciate you coming today. Great guest. Find her online, and I will talk to you all later.